panel now is called Social and Democratic Recovery of Ukraine. There is a question mark in the title, and I hope we will get some indications in terms of what voice society will have in Ukraine. Let me welcome to the stage chair of this panel, Valeria Izik, EU Policy Officer at Bankwatch Network CE in Brussels. Valeria, the floor is yours.
I hope everyone is happy now after sugar pops up in your blood after lunch, and it's going to be easier to follow our day-long discussion today. So my name is Valeria, and I'm based in Brussels, working in CEE Bankwatch, now working on Ukraine facility, which is a draft regulation, implying 50 billion euro expenditures on Ukraine reconstruction in 2024-2027. And today with me is Yulia Nazarenko, Senior Analyst and Area Coordinator for Education Policy in Cedos. It's a think tank based in Kyiv. Also Viktor Zagreba, the leader of the NGO Vision Zero. He will talk to us about urban mobility and traffic safety. Dr. Bartosz Rydliński, an assistant professor at Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski University in Warsaw and member of the Amicus Europe Foundation Council established by former Polish President Aleksander Kwaśniewski. Andrzej Korniczuk, a policy analyst on international relations at Foundation for European Progressive Studies. We've heard Andrei today already during the first panel discussion, and Vasyl Andreyev, who is today with us online. He's the president for the PROFBUD. It's Building Workers Trade Union of Ukraine. He's also a member of World Council of Building and Woodworkers International, and PhD in Public Administration. So, thank you. So let me start with this. The two most important decisions that we're awaiting in December is on opening accession negotiations for Ukraine, and the second one is on regulation on Ukraine facility, 50 billion euro. In order to prepare the Ukrainian vision on these 50 billion expenditures, Ukrainian government should write a Ukraine plan, which is a framework document which will explain to the European Commission how the money will be spent throughout 4 years and what are the benchmarks defined for Ukrainian and European side for this money to be released. Since early summer 2022, the consultation process started. And since the very first days, three major problems arrived. The first one is the martial law, which basically implies that public consultation are either not happening or happening in a way that doesn't really give a meaningful access to different social and economic stakeholders. Second one, it's time constraint. European Commission cancelled their public consultation and strategic impact assessment to save time on drafting the regulation and release money. But the same was applied also to Ukraine. Because of the time constraint, the public consultation process is not only happening under the radar of the public law, of our framework law on public consultation, but it's also kind of not really in the best standards of European Union, which were first violated by the European Union itself. And the third constraint is the problem of outsiders and insiders to the process of the consultations. There are civil society groups which are very active in Kyiv, and they are in those ongoing consultations behind the closed door, while other public groups don't have the ears of anyone from the decision makers, either in Kyiv or in Brussels. So in this setup, I would ask Yulia to give us a brief picture of who are those economic and social groups we're talking about, and to what extent they're involved or not in the consultation on Ukraine recovery. Yulia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Valeria. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude for the invitation and opportunity to share the thoughts and glimpses in the work we do at Cedos. And today our focus is on democratic and social recovery. So in addressing this theme, I aim to shed lights on groups in Ukraine that often are unnoticed by society, and this includes specific social groups such as, for example, internal displaced persons, refugees, elderly, youth, LGBTQ plus communities, veterans, and people with disabilities. And allow me to provide insights into a few of these groups. I will start with people with disabilities. Russian invasion and ongoing military operations have led to notable increase in number of persons with disabilities, and among civilians and among the military. And the precise figure for individuals acquiring disabilities since 2014 isn't publicly available. However, recent discussions among public officials suggest that at least 600,000 individuals might acquire disability due ongoing armed hostilities. And Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine has significantly impacted persons with disabilities and also households where with disabilities family members. And the invasion has brought attention to existing barriers and inaccessibilities within Ukrainian society and infrastructure. Critical gaps in the civil defense system include the absence of accessible bomb shelters, warning system, and evacuation plans, posing substantial risk to persons with disabilities. And furthermore, accurate data about displacement, about casualties, about injuries among persons with disabilities is lacking. The next group is elderly people, and it is very important to notice that elderly people emerge as the most economically disadvantaged group in the population of Ukraine and facing high levels of material deprivation and poverty. And war-related needs such as evacuation, housing, and social infrastructure damage and blackouts present significant challenges to the incomes and savings of the elderly. Job cuts resulting directly and indirectly from warfare impact not only elderly with prior employment but also their main support networkings, their children and other young relatives. The consequences of the war underscore the strong dependence of the elderly on the informal networks and the difficulties they face in maintaining adequate living conditions during forced internal displacement. And also it is very important that financial vulnerability emerges as leading factor preventing the elderly from evacuating war-affected areas, and this is why often this circumstance leads to the factor that the elderly people stayed on the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine, making them more susceptible to casualties than other age groups, and the lack of economically affordable long-term accommodation in safer areas of Ukraine further compound the issue. Veterans. I want to notice that Ukrainian legislation defines veterans to include combatants, persons with disabilities due to the war, and other war participants, which is the definition that groups people with different experience and needs. And after the beginning of Russian invasion, the number of potential veterans of the Russian-Ukrainian wars has significantly increased. Information regarding the precise number of active servicemen remains undisclosed, so it is not publicly available. And this lack of transparency expands to the social demographic characteristic of servicemen, making it challenging to predict the exact number of future veterans. Nonetheless, according to estimates by the Ministry of Veteran Affairs, it is anticipated that there could be between 4 and 5 million veterans in the future. So, and as a consequences of the invasion, veterans and their families may face various challenges, such as including internal displacement, loss of housing, sources of income, and difficult life circumstances. And additionally, the number of disabled veterans is expected to rise, as a certain percentage of individuals are already being discharged from military service due to the disabilities. And according to the Ministry of Social Policy, from the outset of the invasion until March 2023, more than 2,000 servicemen have been granted the status of a person with a disability. And if we are talking about how these groups involves in the recovery process, yeah, these groups are significantly underrepresented in the reconstruction process. Regrettably, there exists a minimal level of collaboration between organizations advocating for the interests of these groups and key authorities, and the inclusion of these groups' interest in reconstruction plans tends to be more of formality, I would say, and often overlooks their specific needs. And to sum up, I want to say a few words about one-size-fits-all solution for the recovery of specific social groups. There is a need to address the prevalent issues in data collection concerning specific social groups in Ukraine, because we have a lot of problems with data, especially about specific social groups and vulnerable groups in Ukraine, and improving this process is crucial to gain insights into their special needs. It is also important to formulate recovery policies and guide the decision-making process based on evidence-based data pertaining to the needs of social and vulnerable groups and include them in these policies. And this approach ensures a dignified life for all of them. And it is also important to actively engage and collaborate with the organization working directly with these social groups, establish partnership to leverage their expertise, insights, and on-the-ground knowledge, enriching the recovery process with a holistic perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yulia. You mentioned that we have lots of social groups now, and some of them increased in number since the full-scale Russian invasion. And unfortunately, as for now, we already know that 39 billion out of 50 billion from the Ukraine facility will go straight to the state budget to actually pay the salaries and support for the social groups, which leaves us with very little sum of money to actually reconstruct and rebuild Ukraine. When we were looking with our colleagues into the text of Ukraine facility and then the proposal that Ukrainian government rolled out in Ukraine plan, some topics seem to be entirely forgotten, and I have a feeling that it happened with transport. And Viktor made this content analysis as soon as the plan was rolled out, saying, I found once or twice a word transport in the document, which is frightening considering that all those social groups, especially people with disabilities, will need to somehow cross the country, live their lives, and get to their workplace or bring their kids to the kindergarten. Viktor, could you please elaborate a little bit more on what's the situation in this sector and how we can remedy it?
Yes. I would like just to correct you a little bit here. The transport in general is not missed. Public transport is missed because our government, our president, before the war even, they put a lot of emphasis on transport, and transport for them is roads, and the roads means cars and trucks. Yes, so the public transport, that's what is really missing. Yes, the situation, a little bit of background about public transport in Ukraine. We received quite a good heritage from our Soviet Union times of electric public transport systems. For instance, just 2 years ago, before the full-scale invasion, we had 41 cities in Ukraine with electric buses, and the general fleet of electric buses was 3,700, which is much more than in Poland, for instance. Of course, I mean trolley buses, yes, because they are electric buses. And in many cities, we use advanced technology where we put extra battery on those trolley buses, which allows to use them on longer routes, even when the infrastructure is not present. And in 18 cities, we have tram systems. And we are number 3 by tram systems in Europe, and number 1 with a huge advantage in terms of trolleybus systems. Unfortunately, those systems are deteriorating. They are many of them are like at the end of their life cycle. They are basically physically dying. They are collapsing. The tracks are very old. All the infrastructure is very old, and the quality of service is very old. Very, very poor. Our trams and trolleybuses and buses are slow, are not reliable, are not comfortable, and are perceived by politicians and by the society in general as something social, something for, those poor and elderly and jobless or maybe too young people who cannot afford a car. So the policy in Ukraine, unfortunately, over the last year before the war was very pro-automobile and not really social in the transport sector. Yes, so this is my short answer. Unfortunately, the trend before the war was bad, and now we don't see any positive signs, even though we see how huge an opportunity it can be if the government will pay more attention to public transport, because it's something where the EU will be happy to give money for, to invest money for, not in the roads, yes, not in bridges or tunnels, but in public transport, in stations. And Poland, you guys are very well aware, I think, because Poland, I respect so much how successful your country has been over the last 20 years in using the EU money to rebuild and upgrade your rail system, your public transport. In many cities, I always see the EU flags, co-financed. I want to see that in Ukraine in 5 or 10 years, but so far doesn't seem to happen. This is my short answer, and I have some remark about people with disabilities. In transport policy or in transport planning, we don't really operate this phrase, people with disabilities, but we use a group with reduced mobility, маломобільні групи in Ukrainian. And sometimes we speak with officials and I ask them, what do you think, what percentage of population of Kiev, let's say, belong to the groups with reduced mobility? And they guess, 10%, 5, 15, 25. The answer is 100% of population of Ukraine belong to the group of reduced mobility. We all belong to that group, just in different stages of our life. When we are very young children, we are people with reduced mobility. When we have young children, and I have 3, they're not young already, but and when they were small, we were family with reduced mobility. We had the strollers. When somebody is injured temporarily or had a surgery or heavy COVID, and you cannot really walk stairs, you need to elevator to get up. And of course, people with long-term disabilities and elderly people, just people who are 70 years old, even healthy people, they are already people with reduced mobility. So it must be mandatory, right, to make Ukraine accessible, to make transport infrastructure, not only houses and offices and universities, but everything between accessible. I'm very happy that the First Lady is leading kind of this message. She's leading this cause. I don't think she has really a vision, a strategic vision, how to achieve it. I see that she is very motivated and dedicated in her team, but I don't see like really strategic vision in her team, how to achieve that. And I think this is something maybe we can learn from Poland, you know, because I think Poland is not 100% accessible probably yet, but it's much, much better than it was 20 years ago, from my observation. So, but I will be happy to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Viktor. I've learned something new today. I didn't know that we all actually belong to the group with reduced disabilities, but yeah, that was cool to know. My highlight for today. You said that we would like to see more this co-financed projects in Ukraine, and it will eventually happen. Now we try to take from the EU their practices, best practices, and apply them to Ukraine facility. This is how we came up with this idea of phasing in European Code of Conduct on Partnership into Ukraine facility to make a legally binding obligation for Ukrainian government and for the European Commission and other EU stakeholders to actually make sure that this discussion happens, it's transparent, it's meaningful, and we have all the right criteria to actually make sure that stakeholders like we have today in this panel are at the table of negotiations. When we were discussing with our panelists how we're going to shape this discussion, I was surprised how little I know about different associations in Ukraine, especially about building associations, trade unions, because I actually think that we don't work quite closely with those trade unions in Ukraine, and that's something that we maybe need to fix. And I was very glad when I met Vasyl, and he explained to me the work that had been happening while we were all concentrating on civil society group engagement, but what actually trade unions made and what is their input into the discussion and how they can shape Ukraine reconstruction in a way that our construction workers, for instance, come back, or if they come back from the front line, they have a meaningful integration back into their profession and they can feel fulfilled by doing their part of the reconstruction work. Vasyl, the floor is yours. Please walk us through the reconstruction workers in reconstruction field and explain what are the problems now and how we can make sure that your voice is heard in the consultation process now.
Thank you very much, Valeria. Thanks, comrades, for your invitation. Apologies, I'm not with you right now. The system of exit permits is existing in Ukraine during the curfew. That's great to receive the invitation and bring your feedback from the side of the workers who will and right now are constructing and reinforcing, for example, electric grid and other critical infrastructure in Ukraine. If there is possibility to show some 3 slides, it will be okay. If not, and I see my comrades on the panel didn't so, I will say a few words about the vision from the worker side. First of all, let me say some characteristics of the construction sector in Ukraine. It's not a big sector. So the sectoral gross product is only 4 billion euros based on 2021. And if you will take a look on the figures of the destruction received after the military aggression of Russia, already 10 months ago, it was announced like 380 billion. So you will receive about 100 years with the same capacity of the construction sector to rebuild Ukraine under this status of the 2021. So of course it's not acceptable, and the issue how many workers we will need for the reconstruction Ukraine. Nevertheless, it will be green, sustainable, or whatever, or at least old. We will have or increase 10 times the number of workers, or just shift our approach to the construction process at all. But even existing workers are quite in a complicated situation in Ukraine. First of all, the rate of the informal involvement in the sector, in our language it calls informal labor or unregistered labor, is more than 70%, 70% of the entire population. That easily could be checked if you divide the number of the people involved in the sector and the people employed in the sector. So you can take a look that 700,000 people who were accounted by the Statistic Agency of Ukraine are not those who are working in the construction sector. And this, together with the nominal average wage in the sector, which is right now only 310 euros per entire month of working, about 170 hours based on the 40 hours long working week. Yesterday I was on the panel together with the construction developers, the same in during the big exhibition of the Ukrainian construction business in Warsaw. And there was a very funny discussion when employers were reporting that no, 300 euros is only nominal salary, and we pay more than 1,000 to every worker who is working right now, not in military action areas. And this is funny because the employers even don't hear themselves. Like they know this Freud with the salary existing, and this Freud is pushing out workers, skilled workers from the sector. So all this, together with, for example, that construction sector is so hazardous and dangerous that it's the second biggest place of the work-related accidents after agricultural sector, where unregistered chemicals together with the dangerous mechanisms are used by workers who are not trained to do them. And all this creates quite complicated conditions for the working of the construction workers, and because of that, that will be a very big question, whether those people who are returning, nevertheless, they are safe and healthy after the military action, returning to their working places. Will they remain in Ukraine and attract their families who fled Ukraine in 2022? Or they will move to their families abroad to work in far better conditions comparing to Ukraine. This is very open question. I will not say what will be the result of the ending of the military actions and starting rebuilding Ukraine, but the reality is we will need a high demand of the skilled workers in construction sector. From one point of view, of course, we will have a reserve from, for example, metallurgy workers. I think no one of us believes that our oligarchs who received for free big metallurgy plants in Mariupol or somewhere in the east, which are right now bombed to the ground, will invest billion or 2 billion or 100 billion euros to build the same big plants from the ground zero there. Maybe Mariupol will never be industrial heart of Ukraine anymore. But we will have hundreds of thousand workers who were employed there, and maybe they can find themselves in the construction sector. This could be reality if the conditions will be improved. And thus, for example, the EU Commission is emphasizing while negotiating with Ukraine that the Ukrainian labor legislation and social legislation received maybe the lowest rate after the assessment of EU Commission before publishing last Friday the feedback on the assessment of Ukraine, ready or not ready for the negotiation of the accession. They said labor legislation together with the labor inspectorate that should be returned to the action is something that could create better working conditions in the Ukrainian construction sector, because the rebuilding will be so huge and the demand will be so high that there will be needed very sharp decisions from the Ukrainian government. But Ukrainian workers and their organizations like unions are not sitting and just demanding or blaming employers or our government. We started already for our comrades and not union members the courses, short-term courses, to allow them receive micro skills in construction and earn money already after 1, 2, or 3 weeks of the training on the spot. Construction is not something like spaceship science. Construction skills could be trained by everyone who has even not 2 legs and 2 arms. I think our government is very strict in the announcement that there will be a very huge control over the construction enterprises who will take more and more disabled people for the work, and there will be no chance to explain that we are not taking people with disabilities because we are risky and hazardous sector. That's why they need to be employed somewhere in the supermarkets or whatever, or in the offices, but not in the construction. So we are already ready, and 6 regions are covered by our initiative, financed by us, by our reserves, trade union reserves, and the trade union reserves from the EU member states. And I hope that will show employers and our government the exit from the situation of lack of the qualified workforce. Maybe I will stop here because my watch is showing that I already exhausted my 7 minutes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Vasyl. It was very instructive and insightful, I think, to at least 3 of us who are not that well acquainted with trade unions. Bartosz, I would like to ask you to reflect on what Vasyl just said, and to talk a little bit more about this exit from this situation, and maybe even recommendations how Polish trade unions succeeded back then, and if not, what is hampering the progress?
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm the only non-Ukrainian in the panel, so my first and primary remark is that how Ukraine wants to rebuild after the criminal aggression of Russia should be decided only by the Ukrainians. This is up to you guys to decide. This is not to the other Western or Central European to decide about you. But my voice is not a rigid recommendation. This is rather my friendly advice, my idea of an experience of the person who spent majority of my life in the so-called real capitalism dimension. And I think that, and I find our discussion very valid and important, because every single time when I'm joining the talk about the reconstruction of Ukraine is very technical and economic oriented. So how many percent of the GDP should be spent on the railways, roads, factories, and whatsoever, and very little we talk about the social and democratic reconstruction of Ukraine. So in a way, I think that we should escape from this technical, neoliberal dimension of reconstruction, and understanding that at the end of the day, we should discuss about the reconstruction of Ukraine with people with disabilities, right? With people with post-war trauma. So in a way, we should learn from post-Second War experience of Central Europe, but also of the post-war from Yugoslavia, because we very often forgot that such tragedy also happened there. And I don't know if the Polish trade union story is the success story. I think that we are somewhere in between. But I think that the crucial for the social and democratic reconstruction, in my opinion, as a member of the Polish Teachers Union, is a social dialogue. Because in the end of the day, where we have democracy, at home, but also in the place where we spend a lot of our time, at jobs, when we go, and find ourselves in the different position as a trade unionist, as a worker, with employee. And I think that the role of the government in the social dialogue is crucial. That the government should be treating both sides equally, shouldn't picking sides. And I think this is one of my experience from being many times in Ukraine, also with President Vasyński, that the discussion is enormously shaped by this idea of free market, minimal state, enormous big role of oligarchs. I would say that what Ukraine or what Europe needs more is not only social dialogue, but also welfare state. That the welfare state with the good public services, that everybody can join, both people from middle class, those who are rich, but also those who are poor. And I think that the welfare state and the social dialogue can be an idea for Ukraine how to treat this awful tragedy of Russian aggression as a restart moment for the new social economical system in Ukraine with the good quality public services. And my last recommendation, because Valeria told me that I have 6 minutes and I'm academic and I'm very devoted to what the chairwoman said. I think that the last lesson from Poland, and this is also an opportunity for Ukraine, that Ukraine, with the good social dialogue, with the good welfare state, with the good quality public services, including public transport, could avoid the mistake of Poland in terms of development. Because we have very uneven development of state, where young people, if they would like to have good careers, have to go to the big cities. So my friendly recommendation to my dear, beloved Ukrainian friends and neighbors, I wish you to rebuild the fatherland of the small and medium cities. That people shouldn't go to Kiev, to Dnipro to find their good life. They should find their good life also in the rural regions in Ukraine, and that's my friendly recommendation, and I keep fingers crossed for you guys.
Thank you very much. It all brings me back to this first dilemma that I mentioned in the beginning of the discussion, that during the martial law, we cannot fight back Russians with one hand and do meaningful reforms with the other hand. It's just not possible. It seems like every time we try to capitalize on another spark of Ukrainian spirit, which happened during the Revolution of Dignity and now is happening after Russia started its full-scale invasion, we try to use this window of opportunity, but we again face the same problem of democracy which cannot strive in the emergency situation like this one. And that's why different social economic groups, civil society organizations are trying now to gently remind at every single public forum that we have on Ukraine reconstruction that if we fail these negotiations on influencing Ukraine reconstruction from each and every one who is represented today, then the democracy value that we are fighting, that our soldiers are fighting every single day, is failed. And this brings me to my question to Andriy. We now face this existential decision on Ukraine accession negotiations and reconstruction. And I shared with you those recommendations that we tabled to the European Parliament and that were adopted and heavily supported by all political groups in the European Parliament to make sure that this dialogue is happening even though we have martial law in Ukraine, even though the public consultations shouldn't be happening as we want to have them, because there is scarce human resource to work with this, with those who want to provide input. There is no time. How we can make sure that European Code of Conduct on Partnership is followed by Ukrainian government, and how we can welcome the help from our partners, allies, from our Polish political friends who will hopefully be, who we will see hopefully a lot in European Parliament after the elections, how we can put our effort together to make this point about the meaningful public consultations.
Thank you for these questions. I have apologized on behalf of my colleague Uwe, who's supposed to be here today, but we discussed reduced mobility, and he is unfortunately a prime example of that, as having had a twisted ankle. That is an example when you are really sort of immobilized and could not travel. But because we share a lot of work at the Foundation for European Progressive Studies on these questions, I'll try to also answer them as much as possible. What immediately comes to my mind, I mean, when you discuss the social dialogue discussions, now for the last month, we see so actively Ukraine being pushed into elections, saying, all right, but during wartime, you can do it. Or, my question, Mark, if you go from 0 to 10, why can't you do something which is meaningful, important, and also get that things involved? And also the suggestion from Bartosz, just a quick reflection, because I recall in some just recent discussions, Ella Libanova, who's a major Ukrainian expert on demography, she's kind of suggesting that the structure of the cities will drastically change. It's likely that we'll have sort of huge agglomerations where people will move. I don't know if it's still avoidable, but I think it's one of the projections where this middle cities type of could disappear. So it would be very unfortunate, I guess. But I suppose it's also something we should prepare for that. And also another statistic, building on our colleagues speaking about trade unions and job security, etc., and social dialogue. I recall that prior to the full-scale invasion, when the war was still ongoing, but mainly concentrated in the east of Ukraine, or the two regions, when the population was asked what they fear most is losing job, and only second was so people. And nowadays in Europe, because the progressives are doing a lot of research, affordable housing is something that Europeans are afraid most. Not, obviously they have in mind the war and other climate change, but those small things are as important as ever before. But coming back very quickly to the question, what immediately I think we should be doing is also drawing attention to the recent instruments that have been already implemented in the EU, and they offer us some lessons learned on how not to do things. Next Generation EU, for instance, funding, which some countries have been struggling for various reasons, Poland including, with access to funding, etc. But it was widely criticized that it's this sort of post-COVID recovery instruments that the country should be, that it was overly bureaucratic and very slow, and also stuck somewhere on the government level. Which I think it's crucial that indeed, as you mentioned, that there should be a strong alliance which should span from expert community to civil society to political groups, because there are things that we, for instance, being a political foundation, can also communicate to certain groups. But having that strong alliance and importance on how you structure the whole Ukraine facility and cooperation with Ukraine from day one. And I think there's so much consolidation around it, because when you open American documents, the German Marshall Fund, immediately after the full-scale invasion started, they proposed something which they called the New Marshall Plan, and they say Ukrainian civil society, I quote, should be involved from day one. And these kind of messages are everywhere. So it seems like everyone knows that they should do it, but the thing is about how you generate commitment and political will. And I think one plus, one advantage that is being had, that the Ukrainian government simply has this, it understands the conditionality on behalf of the European partners, so it cannot really there's sort of no third way. Either you somehow align at what your European partners want you to do, or what's the other way? It's to quote the propaganda of Kremlin, a failed state. Because it's very difficult then for Ukraine to have a really structured path. So in that sense, I think the general understanding, my feeling is that it's already there. Maybe it's scattered a lot in different agencies. So it's more on the coordination and more on keeping it high on the agenda. And especially when it comes to civil society. I recall also that I was at a conference recently in Brussels where a representative of the European Commission was during the panel, and all the speakers kept reminding about the importance of involvement in society, inclusiveness, etc. The person was noting down the different things. So I also would cut some slack, to use informal language, for the Commission. I also understand that they are kind of in a difficult situation, because I think it's unprecedented that Ukraine being at war, they need to come up with something that they can be flexible and adaptable enough to changing circumstances. But I think, to sum up, it's almost as the whole track record of support for Ukraine since independence, the eastern, southern neighborhoods, all the analysis which I have read throughout the years, constantly had this problem that the support was very centralized, while I think we as Ukraine and Poland emphasis that Ukraine asset is in its decentralized nature. So I think that is step one, but the second step is indeed to go into social contract and social dialogue, because long term, although Ukrainians are excellent in sort of fighting the authority and being able to be resilient, you have to somehow cooperate long term, and you have to communicate that. So on behalf of what we do in Brussels, I think it's keeping the pressure and trying to fight the fatigue, but also making sure that the Ukrainian voices from the civil society are constantly present at the discussions, as well as the expert community. Sometimes it can be difficult because of the fatigue and different things, but we just should keep moving. I think that the breaking point is close enough, and if you keep long enough the pressure, it falls into the right sort of spaces.
Thank you very much. I would like to use 2 minutes left for questions, maybe if there are any in the audience. Yes, please.
Yeah, just a super quick remark. I'm really happy that it's also an opportunity for NGO and trade unions from Ukraine to meet and speak, because, and this is something I would like to draw your attention to also from the security point of view. We all know reconstruction of Ukraine is going to be huge in terms of its sheer numbers, 4 times the Marshall Plan, the money that was promised by the EU. So huge investment. And now the question comes, which companies will get the contracts? And by which companies, I mean geopolitically wise, Chinese, Turkish, or European. And if the price is the sole factor deciding, of course, and this is something Vasyl Andreyev was talking about, Chinese companies are very good in bringing Chinese workers because they're cheaper, they don't have the labor law, or Bangladeshi workers, and so on and so forth. So now the question is not only about, of course, the things we are discussing here, the question of social cohesion, social justice, and so on. It's also a question of security. Do we want a European, Ukrainian cooperation with good labor standards and environmental standards? Or do we want a kind of new Gulf? For those of you who haven't been there, it's all built by people brought from Sri Lanka or Bangladesh and living in the barracks. So that's definitely not the reconstruction we would like to see in our neighboring country, because we need a stable and wealthy Ukraine.
That's a very good remark, and I think with this we can end our... Oh, sure, of course, Bartosz.
The very, very short answer to this remark, first of all, I would definitely agree with Mateusz. If Ukrainian president or Ukrainian people ask about my opinion, I would say, like, it doesn't matter which companies, it's Chinese, American, Ukrainian, maybe not Russian, okay? Would be in favor of rebuilding Ukraine. I think that those companies which have contracts of employment and have strong independent unions should be prioritized. And I think this is what the EU should also put into the contract, just in case. Because I think that, as I said before, the reconstruction can be also a good chance. I know that for many Ukrainians would be difficult what I'm going just to say it about what happened in Warsaw. In Warsaw, after the war, after the German Nazis destroyed this town, we had so-called term blessing of war. Blessing, namely, that we could reconstruct the city which was badly managed by the Russian forces in the moment when the town was built. Marszałkowska Street is an example, right? It was a very narrow street. So in a way, the tragedy of 1944 and 1939 and 1943 was used by the People's Polish Republic as an idea to reconstruct the city, to more pro-citizen in a way. I know that communistic city, comparing to the modern Western cities, is not a good example, but comparing to the 19th century Warsaw, it was kind of a development for future.
Thank you, Bert. It's really a good point that you made here. I see that Vasyl is holding his hand, so I think that given that we have 5 more minutes, Vasyl, please, the floor is yours, and yeah, I think you can take the whole time of this that is left, because I think that it's really central that we understand how to bring trade unions into the game.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Anyway, I'll try to be narrow. Maybe someone will appear with the extra question. First of all, about the Chinese, the expectations from us, because we, like Ukrainians, and we're working with the Chinese contractors in Ukraine before, and our international organization was also working, and you maybe remember the Chinese companies are right now entering the African states as wide as possible. So the Chinese companies are poorly expected to be in Ukraine. First of all of us know the Chinese position in the war. Second of this issue, all of us know the position of the United States, the biggest ally along with the EU, for us to survive. And third, Chinese companies are usually not coming to utilize other states' funds. They are coming with their own funds to build something and then use it for returning money and remain in the country. So it's unlikely we will see those in Ukraine. Only in the case, of course, there will be zero or something poor investments in the rebuilding infrastructure. Maybe in that case, we will receive some diplomatic movement that China will ask, sorry, Ukraine, we were supporting Russian with the military equipment that killed your people. Maybe let us start from the clean page. And second, about who will be rebuilding, of course, we expect and we understand that when there will be general contractors from the countries which are investing in the rebuilding, German Kochtiv or Austrian Strabag or French companies under the list, or on Swedish or whatever, but we hardly can expect that Swedish or German workers will come to dismantle a mine building with the Russian missiles still inside, with the toxic engine fuel or under exploded where this military warheads. inside those missiles. But we see that there should be rules for the subcontractors of those European or other national companies who are coming to Ukraine with their subcontractors from Ukrainian side or non-Ukrainian side, because all the subcontractors should follow the international labor law and the local law on safety at work first of all. Thanks a lot. That's what I was wanting to say.
Well, I think if there is one thing that I can wrap up this discussion is that we've married Ukrainian civil society organizations to trade unions of Ukraine. So I think that if this is a good start, then it happened today, and this is thanks to this platform. Thank you.